October's wind sliced through Black Hollow Ridge like a blade, carrying with it the scent of damp pine, cold stone, and the faint metallic tang of ore. The jagged peaks rose sharply against a bruised sky, shadowed valleys curling like dark fingers between the ridges. Miners, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, trudged along narrow trails toward the shafts carved into the mountain, lanterns swinging to illuminate the fog-heavy morning. This remote settlement in the Colorado Territory was a meager cluster of timber cabins, their wooden walls groaning under the constant pressure of wind and frost. Smoke spiraled from crooked chimneys, blending with the fog to form ghostly shapes that danced among the trees. Men worked long days in the mines, extracting silver and gold, driven not just by promise of wealth, but by desperation and hunger. Yet, for every vein of ore uncovered, there were whispers of a darker vein running through Black Hollow Ridge, one that swallowed men whole. Shadows clung to the mountains like living things, and a chill wind often swept the ridges before a disappearance, curling through the trees and tunnels with a predator's patience. In 1889, the first rumors began quietly, dismissed as accidents or misadventures. But as the days passed, cabins were left empty, tools abandoned, and faint metallic scents lingered in the corridors of the mines. Miners began noticing the inexplicable, footprints ending abruptly, torches extinguishing on their own, and glimpses of figures too tall, too thin, and pale to be human. Old-timers spoke in hushed voices of Black Hollow's eyes, a force watching, waiting, deciding who would vanish and who would survive. Their warnings went unheeded at first, overshadowed by greed and necessity. But the ridge demanded attention, and soon, attention alone could not protect those who dared trespass its shadowed heart. Even now, the air at Black Hollow Ridge felt alive. Every creak of timber, every rustle of leaves, every sigh of wind seemed to speak a language the living could barely comprehend. The vanishing miners were more than stories. They were a warning, written in the silence of the cabins, the shifting paths of the fog, and the dark veins of the mountain itself. It began with Samuel Griggs, a wiry man whose hands were permanently scarred from decades of prying silver from stone. Samuel had lived his entire life in the Colorado Territory, and he knew Black Hollow Ridge better than most. Yet, nothing could have prepared him, or anyone, for the ridge's quiet, patient malevolence. On a crisp morning in late September, Samuel set out for the northern shaft, his lantern swinging with each careful step along the frost-hardened trail. The air was thick with mist, curling through the trees, muffling sound and obscuring vision. Each step brought him closer to the heart of the mountain, to the dark veins that promised wealth and whispered danger. By midday, Samuel was deep within the shaft. His pick struck stone in a rhythmic echo, a lonely percussion that carried through the tunnels and into the fog outside. Hours passed, the light outside dimming as autumn sun struggled against rolling clouds. But when night fell and Samuel failed to return, panic began to ripple through the town. A search party of miners ventured into the shaft, lanterns cutting weak cones of light through the darkness. They called for Samuel, their voices bouncing off the stone walls and swallowed by shadow. What they found was unnerving. His tools were neatly stacked, his lunch untouched, and the faint smell of metallic tang lingering in the air. There was no struggle, no indication of collapse, no trace of Samuel. He had vanished entirely. Whispers spread quickly. Some claimed they saw a shadowy figure slipping silently between the trees along the ridge, tall and impossibly thin. Others said they heard Samuel's voice echoing from deep within the fog, calling for help before fading into unnatural silence. Families barred their doors at dusk. Even the bravest miners began pairing up, though caution offered little protection. Sheriff Elias Harper, a pragmatic man with decades of experience in law enforcement, attempted to rationalize the disappearances. Cave-ins, accidents, perhaps even wild animals. But as more miners failed to return, the evidence defied explanation. Samuel Griggs was not simply missing, he had been erased. And Black Hollow Ridge, patient and silent, had claimed its first victim. By the end of that week, the town felt the weight of the ridge's presence. Fear was no longer whispered in the shadows. It settled in the cabins, rode along the frost-crusted trails, and clung to every miner venturing too close to the shafts. And though no one yet understood the full scope of the horror, the first disappearance had made one truth undeniable. The ridge was alive with something beyond human comprehension, and it was hungry. In the weeks following Samuel Griggs' disappearance, Black Hollow Ridge seemed to grow more sinister with each passing day. Miners spoke in hushed tones about faint noises that followed them through the shafts. The clink of unseen picks, distant shuffling footsteps, and occasional whispers that mimicked familiar voices, calling them deeper into the darkness. It began subtly, small details that should have been dismissed, tools left in perfect order, only to be found miles away, footprints that ended abruptly on narrow ridges or in the middle of tunnels, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. The miners' lamps, sometimes, flickered and died without cause, leaving them blind in the suffocating gloom. The local doctor, Thaddeus Keene, a gaunt and nervous man, examined those returning from the shafts. Hands trembled, faces were pale, and their eyes darted as if they feared unseen watchers. Some swore that they had glimpsed tall, skeletal figures in the fog, and when they turned to follow, the shapes vanished as if woven into the mountain itself. Others spoke of faint metallic odors, the scent of blood mingled with ore, lingering too long to be ignored. Even the most rational miners began to feel the ridge's watchful gaze. They reported walls shifting slightly when unobserved, tunnels that seemed to twist on their own, and shadows that stretched longer than the source could possibly allow. One miner, returning late from the northern shaft, swore he felt something brush past him, cold and wet, and heard breathing that wasn't his own. Whispers of the Hollow Watcher began circulating. Old-timers recalled tales from before the mining boom, that the ridge was protected by a spirit, an entity neither dead nor alive, guarding the veins of silver and gold hidden within its bones. It demanded respect, patience, and fear, and it fed on those who dared to ignore its rules. By me, D. October, fear had taken tangible form. Families barred their doors, lanterns were lit earlier, and children were warned never to speak of the ridge aloud. Black Hollow Ridge was no longer a passive landscape. It had become a predator, patient, cunning, and invisible, hunting those who worked its veins, and the signs in the shadows were the first proofs that no man could escape its grasp. The ridge whispered of what was to come, and the town, still clinging to hope, could only listen in terror. The Smith brothers, Thomas and Eli, were regarded as the most experienced miners in Black Hollow Ridge. Born and raised in the Colorado Territory, they had spent their lives navigating the jagged terrain, reading the mountain like an open map. Their confidence, however, would soon prove tragically insufficient. On a damp morning in mid-October, the brothers descended into the northern shaft together. Their boots crunched over frost-hardened earth, lanterns swinging to illuminate the darkness, torches casting flickering shadows against the carved stone walls. The rhythm of their picks striking rock was steady, almost meditative, until Thomas paused. Eli noticed it first. His brother was gone. One moment Thomas had been adjusting a support beam, and the next, nothing. The lantern light revealed only the walls, the scattered tools, and the faint metallic scent of the mine air. Panic surged through Eli, his voice echoing desperately, calling Thomas's name as he ran through twisting tunnels that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Minutes became hours. Search parties were organized, venturing into the shadowed shafts with lanterns and rifles, shouting for the brothers. Every tunnel explored revealed nothing but eerie signs. Footprints that ended mid-step, walls scratched with claw-like marks, and an overwhelming cold that seemed to thicken the air itself. The Hollow Watcher, though unseen, seemed to manipulate the terrain, closing exits, guiding searchers deeper into darkness, and ensuring the ridge claimed its victims with surgical precision. By nightfall, the searchers returned empty-handed. The town at the base of the ridge felt the grip of fear tighten. The Smith brothers had been experienced, capable men. If even they could vanish, no one was safe. Families shuttered windows, men avoided lone trips to the shafts, and children were forbidden to approach the ridge under unsolved circumstances. Rumors spread rapidly. Miners whispered of pale, impossibly tall figures seen fleetingly in fog, of lamps extinguished by unseen hands, and voices calling from the dark, carrying the tone and cadence of those long missing. Black Hollow Ridge was no longer just a dangerous mountain. It was a predator, stalking and hunting, aware of every movement, and patient in its deadly game. By mid-October, the disappearances had transformed from mere tragedy into a living nightmare. The Smith brothers' vanishing cemented the mountain's reputation as a place where men could enter, but never leave. And in the shadows, the Hollow Watcher waited, unblinking, unhurried, and infinitely hungry. By late October 1889, the town beneath Black Hollow Ridge had transformed into a place dominated by fear. Families barricaded their cabins, keeping children inside and doors tightly shut. Miners traveled in pairs, or sometimes not at all, and every footstep on the frost-crusted trails carried the weight of anxiety. Even the most stoic men avoided the ridge after dark, whispering of shadows that seemed to move independently, and of whispers in the fog that mimicked the voices of friends lost to the mountain. Sheriff Elias Harper, a man who had spent decades maintaining order in the frontier towns of Colorado, realized that superstition alone could not explain the mounting disappearances. Samuel Griggs and the Smith brothers were gone, vanished without a trace. Harper organized a small investigation party, a handful of miners and townsfolk armed with lanterns, ropes, and revolvers. Their mission was simple yet terrifying: enter the shafts, search the tunnels, and uncover any sign of the missing men. As the party descended into the northern shaft, the air grew frigid and thick, curling around their necks and lungs. Lantern light danced across walls etched with strange marks, gouges too deliberate to be natural, claw-like scratches, and symbols that no one could decipher. Every sound, dropping tools, a misstep, even the echo of their own voices, was magnified, twisted by the tunnels, until they could scarcely tell reality from hallucination. Hours passed. Anxiety thickened into terror. Then, one of the men claimed to see a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, pale as frost, gliding silently between the shafts. The shape vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the party in a state of panic. They called for retreat, but the tunnels seemed different now. Longer, twisting, impossible. The ridge itself seemed to resist their escape, funneling them deeper into darkness, as if dinged them toward the fate of those who had vanished before. When the group finally emerged, shaken and empty-handed, the town's fear deepened. Black Hollow Ridge had proven that no skill, no courage, and no weapon could guarantee safety. The mountain was not just a place of labor. It was a sentient force, calculating and patient, hunting those who dared trespass its shadows. From that day on, the ridge demanded respect, fear, and vigilance. The disappearances had escalated from mere tragedies to a pattern of horror, leaving townsfolk trapped between superstition, reality, and a darkness that seemed to breathe and watch. As the cold winds of late October swept through Black Hollow Ridge, a few of the town's older residents began to speak of stories older than the settlement itself, tales whispered by their grandparents of the Hollow Watcher. According to legend, long before miners had carved shafts and cabins into the mountain, the ridge had its guardians, spirits that protected its veins of silver and gold, punishing those who dared disturb its secret riches. The Hollow Watcher, as described in these old tales, was a figure almost human, yet distorted and terrifying. It was unnaturally tall and impossibly thin, with pallid skin that seemed to absorb the dim light of lanterns, and eyes like deep, empty pits, reflecting not what was in front of them, but what lay buried within a person's soul. It moved with silent grace, appearing and disappearing at will, an intelligence older than the settlement itself, omnipresent yet never fully seen. Some claimed the Watcher could manipulate the mountain itself. Tunnels shifted without warning, paths closed or twisted unexpectedly, and men lost their way even when following familiar trails. Others spoke of voices carried by the wind, imitations of friends, siblings, or long-lost neighbors, beckoning miners deeper into the darkness, only to vanish when approached. The Watcher's presence was said to instill a dread unlike any other, a weight in the chest, a cold that seeped to the bone, and a persistent sense of being observed, hunted, and chosen. Even Sheriff Harper, who had spent years enforcing order in frontier towns, felt unease creep into his thoughts. The evidence, vanished miners, shifting tunnels, claw-like markings, and inexplicable cold, could not be rationalized. Superstition had become reality. The ridge had a will of its own, and the Hollow Watcher was its instrument, its unblinking eyes patrolling every crevice, every shadow. Families now spoke of the Watcher not as a story, but as a warning. The disappearances of Samuel Griggs and the Smith brothers were no longer isolated tragedies. They were deliberate acts, claimed by a force beyond human comprehension. And in the shadowed forests, within the labyrinthine mines, and along the fog-enshrouded slopes, the ridge waited. Patient, merciless, eternal. By the end of October, Black Hollow Ridge had transformed from a frontier settlement into a place of legend and fear. Its story, the story of the vanishing miners, was no longer confined to whispers by the hearth. It had become a living nightmare, carried in the minds of all who survived, and etched into the very rocks of the ridge itself. Desperation gripped the town. With miners still disappearing and the legend of the Hollow Watcher growing, a larger, more organized rescue party was assembled. Armed with lanterns, rifles, ropes, and an unspoken determination, they set out to the ridge at first light, intent on locating the missing miners, or at least uncovering the truth behind the mountain's malevolence. A thick fog lay over the slopes that morning, curling between the trees and settling into the gaping mouths of the shafts. Each step seemed heavier, the crunch of frost underfoot swallowed by the white haze. Visibility was limited to a few feet, and shadows moved unnaturally in the mist, creating fleeting images that vanished when looked at directly. The men pressed on, calling the names of the missing, their voices fading into the eerie silence. As they approached the northern shaft, the fog thickened, wrapping around their ankles and dampening their clothes. Lanterns flickered, casting long distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and twist independently. Strange sounds emerged from the tunnels, a scraping of rock that wasn't the miners' picks, faint whispers in a language no one could recognize, and the sudden extinguishing of lamps, leaving men stumbling blindly. Then, the unimaginable happened. One of the miners, a young man named Walter, vanished in a heartbeat. His lantern tumbled to the ground, guttering and dying as the fog seemed to pull him into the shadows. Screams echoed through the tunnels, mingling with the wind. But there was no way to find him. The ridge itself seemed to shift, guiding the rescue party deeper into darkness, the tunnels twisting and stretching as if alive. Panic overtook the group. Men stumbled over roots, rocks, and each other, calling out for their comrades. Shadows moved just beyond the lantern light, and every echo seemed deliberate, purposeful, as though the ridge were laughing or watching. By the time the party emerged from the fog, shaken and incomplete, it was clear. The ridge had claimed its victims again, and nothing, no man, no weapon, no courage, could stand against it. The Hollow Watcher remained unseen, but its presence was undeniable, a calculated, patient force, guiding the mountain's deadly design, ensuring that Black Hollow Ridge remained a place where men vanished without a trace. The town below waited, silent and fearful, knowing that those lost would never return, and that the ridge had exacted its toll yet again. After the failed rescue, Black Hollow Ridge became more than a hazard. It became a source of obsession and terror. The townsfolk, shaken to their cores, debated endlessly over what could be causing the disappearances. Some argued for natural explanations: collapsing tunnels, treacherous hidden crevices, and poisonous gases escaping from deep within the mountain. Yet, even the most practical among them could not ignore the eerie patterns, the vanished miners, and the strange phenomena that defied logic. The more superstitious spoke of the Hollow Watcher as if it were flesh and blood, a living guardian of the mountain that punished those who dared claim its treasures. They told tales of figures glimpsed in the fog, impossible in stature and unnaturally pale, appearing and disappearing at will. Others reported hearing voices, sometimes the voices of loved ones, sometimes the voices of men long missing, calling them deeper into the mines, guiding them into the mountain's trap. Families clung to these warnings, locking doors at night and keeping children away from the ridge. Some villagers resorted to talismans, charms, or whispered prayers to ward off the unseen entity. Even Sheriff Harper, a man who valued logic above all, found himself carrying a small token believed to protect against spirits whenever he ventured near the mines. Miners returning from the shafts spoke of changes in the terrain itself. Tunnels shifted, passages became labyrinthine, and familiar landmarks seemed to vanish or move overnight. Some claimed to see faces in the fog, twisted, pale, eyes wide in terror, watching silently, vanishing when approached. Others witnessed flickering lights deep within the mines, moving with impossible speed and pattern, only to disappear before anyone could reach them. By late October, the entire town was trapped in a state of perpetual fear. Black Hollow Ridge was no El longer merely a dangerous mountain. It was a living entity, a predator, and the Hollow Watcher its tireless agent. Superstition had merged with reality, and every shadow, every gust of wind, every whisper carried the weight of inevitable doom. The Vanishing Miners had become more than just stories. They were warnings, and the ridge, patient and eternal, had made it clear. Some places were not meant to be conquered, and some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. By November 1889, only a handful of miners dared to remain on Black Hollow Ridge. The rest had abandoned their cabins and tools, fleeing to the towns below or to safer mines elsewhere. Those who stayed were hardened men, seasoned by years of labor and danger. Yet even their confidence could not withstand the mountain's oppressive presence. A group led by Caleb Thornton, a miner known for his unwavering courage, decided to descend into the eastern shaft. They carried lanterns, ropes, and a grim determination to find answers, or perish trying. As they entered, the air grew colder, denser, and carried an uncanny stillness, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Hours into their descent, the terrain betrayed them. Tunnels that had been straight now twisted unexpectedly. Passages narrowed or opened to impossible chambers. Caleb realized, with mounting terror, that they were no longer following the same paths they had entered. The mountain was alive, bending to a will that none could comprehend. One by one, men vanished. Jacob, a lanky miner with a reputation for steadiness, disappeared in an instant, leaving behind only a rolling lantern that sputtered and died. Thomas, who had been calm only moments before, called out in panic before being swallowed by shadows. Caleb, desperate, tried to gather the remaining men, but the mountain seemed to close around them, corridors shifting like living sinew, trapping them in a labyrinth with no exit. By nightfall, silence fell over the eastern shaft. No man emerged. The town below waited in dread, knowing that those who had ventured in would never return. The mountain had claimed its final victims, and Black Hollow Ridge's legend grew even darker. The disappearances had ceased, but the ridge had not changed. Its tunnels remained, dark and twisting, and its unseen guardian, the Hollow Watcher, continued its relentless vigilance. Those who had survived carried the memory of the vanished, and the mountain itself seemed to whisper reminders of its dominion over men. Black Hollow Ridge was no longer merely a place of work. It had become a monument to terror, a living nightmare etched into the rocks and fog, where the line between myth and reality had vanished completely. In the months and years following the final disappearances, the town at the base of Black Hollow Ridge never fully recovered. Families abandoned cabins and fields, leaving the settlement to rot under the mountain's constant, unyielding gaze. Those who remained were few, haunted not only by memories of lost friends and relatives, but also by the omnipresent dread that the ridge still watched, waiting patiently for the next trespasser. The story of the vanishing miners spread beyond the Colorado territory. Newspapers printed fragmented accounts, travelers shared their warnings, and each retelling added layers of fear and legend. The Hollow Watcher became a symbol of the mountain itself, a patient, calculating, and unseen predator, exacting punishment on those foolish enough to intrude. Adventurers, prospectors, and thrill-seekers occasionally attempted to explore Black Hollow Ridge, driven by curiosity or greed. Few returned, and those who did spoke in murmurs of unnatural shadows, corridors that shifted without warning, and whispers that seemed to emerge from the very walls of the mountain. Their accounts served only to reinforce the ridge's reputation, a place where reality and myth intertwined, and where fear had a tangible presence. Even today, hikers and explorers claim to experience the mountain's influence. Paths vanish or twist, tools disappear inexplicably, and a coldness that feels alive penetrates the soul. Black Hollow Ridge endures as a sentinel of its own secrets, a monument to a terror older than the miners who vanished there. The memory of Samuel Griggs, the Smith brothers, and Caleb Thornton's group lives on, not in bodies, but in whispers, stories, and shadows that refuse to leave the ridge. Their legacy is a chilling reminder. Some places are not meant for human intrusion, and some mountains are alive, patient, and merciless. The vanishing miners, if Black Hollow Ridge are gone, yet their story continues to haunt, echoing through fog, stone, and legend. A warning etched forever into the heart of Colorado's dark, untamed wilderness.